The ocean, usually a cradle of life, became a roaring, indifferent destroyer, stealing everything the small calf had ever known. That winter of 2004, the Boxing Day tsunami tore through the Kenyan coast, but when the floodwaters receded, they left behind a solitary, struggling survivor. He was barely a year old, covered in mud and utterly alone, ripped from his mother and swept miles inland. The villagers, exhausted by their own losses, found him terrified and stranded in a drainage ditch. They called him Owen. This is the story of how profound grief in the aftermath of a catastrophe created the most beautifully impossible kind of family. Now, let's enter their world. If you're already enjoying this story, a quick like and share makes all the difference. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from today. The journey from the coastal ditch to Haller Park was an ordeal, a logistical nightmare requiring dozens of strong hands and the kind of specialized care rarely afforded to a single traumatized calf. When he finally arrived at the wildlife sanctuary near Mombasa, the team realized they were dealing with a creature of immense need. Hippos are herd animals. Their survival is predicated on constant physical contact and social structure, which provides safety and emotional security. Owen, still a baby, was now without either. Haller Park was a place of recovery and reclamation, a vast, carefully managed environment where the scars of the land had been healed and the animals thrived. But even in this haven, Owen was a ghost. He was initially placed in a large contained pond area. The staff worked tirelessly, bringing him milk, fresh grasses, and trying to replicate the gentle nudges and reassuring presence of a mother. They knew they couldn't replace his mother, but they tried to be a human approximation of comfort. However, a hippo calf needs another hippo, or at least a large, grounding presence. Without it, Owen displayed textbook signs of distress. He paced the edges of the water constantly. He would charge the fence in bursts of infantile frustration, only to retreat and slump into the corner, emitting small, high-pitched whimpers that tore at the heart of anyone who heard them. He was not thriving. The staff consulted experts globally, running through the possibilities for companionship. Another hippo was impossible. Hippos are territorial and violent toward unfamiliar juveniles. They considered large ungulates, but the risk of injury was too high. Time was running out. Owen was getting weaker, emotionally shutting down. His refusal to interact, his silent, solitary grieving, was the biggest threat to his life. The keepers had been watching the behavior of another resident, a giant Aldabra tortoise named Mzee. He had been at the park for decades, perhaps over 100 years old, a slow, silent monument to endurance. Mzee occupied an enclosure adjacent to Owen's pond, a space shaded by ancient trees, rich with low-growing vegetation. The idea was absurd. The two species were worlds apart, but the keepers noted something peculiar. Owen would sometimes stop his frantic pacing at the fence line separating them and simply stare at the immense, unmoving shell. The staff reasoned that Mzee, being so large and so inherently non-threatening, might offer a form of inert, non-judgmental stability. A living, breathing, permanent fixture in Owen's desolate world. It was a last resort, a desperate, Hail Mary attempt to give the orphan any form of family structure. They prepared the shared enclosure. The risk was there, but the alternative, Owen's slow death by loneliness, was unacceptable. The decision was made. They would try the impossible. The day of the introduction was tense. Keepers moved the gate separating the enclosures, allowing Owen access to the larger shared space where Mzee grazed slowly, seemingly oblivious to the dramatic experiment unfolding around him. Owen, true to his nature, initially bolted. He charged out of his familiar pond, not in aggression, but in a panicked, directionless rush, as if trying to run away from the sheer weight of his loneliness. He careened past the immense shell of the tortoise, splashing through a shallow pool and crashing into a dirt bank on the far side of the enclosure. He collapsed there, a picture of exhaustion and despair, shivering despite the warmth of the sun. The keepers held their breath, expecting a retreat back into his corner, or perhaps an aggressive outburst toward the unmoving shell. Mzee, for his part, slowly stretched his long neck, regarded the frantic calf with ancient, heavy-lidded eyes, and then resumed munching on a clump of grass. He did not move away, which was the first small victory. After several long minutes of silence, Owen raised his head. He looked across the enclosure at the huge, dark form that was Mzee, and then, slowly, tentatively, he began to walk toward him. It wasn't a charge. It was a hesitant, almost fragile approach, the walk of a creature seeking something it couldn't name. When he reached the tortoise, he didn't attack or play. He simply lowered his massive head, nudged the side of Mzee's shell, and then pressed himself against it, seeking the solid, immovable warmth, like a child finding an anchor in a storm. It was an instantaneous, profound physical gesture of absolute surrender and need. The calf found his rock. The first few days were a blur of observation for the keepers, a mixture of intense relief and continued disbelief. Owen's transformation was immediate and total. The frantic pacing stopped. The high-pitched distress calls vanished. He ceased being a terrified orphan and became simply a calf with a mother. Mzee's shell became his center of gravity. When the sun was high and Owen needed shade, he would push his way under the great curve of the tortoise's carapace, often using it as a pillow. This immense ancient creature, who had lived for over a century and was entirely self-sufficient, had unwittingly become the anchor for a desperate, water-dwelling mammal. Their daily routine quickly established itself as a study in bizarre synchronicity. When Mzee moved to a new patch of grass, which was a process measured in slow, deliberate steps, Owen would move with him. He would walk alongside the tortoise, keeping his body pressed against Mzee's hard shell, occasionally giving a gentle nudge with his broad snout as if checking for reassurance. If Mzee stopped to rest or bask, Owen would immediately settle down beside him, often resting his head on Mzee's hindquarters. This physical contact was non-negotiable for Owen. It was the herd contact his species demanded, the silent, constant reassurance that he was not alone. The keepers noticed the shift in Mzee, too. While Mzee never expressed the kind of affection a mother hippo would, his behavior changed from detached tolerance to something resembling passive acceptance and even protection. Mzee learned to move slower still, adjusting his ancient rhythm to the energetic bursts and sudden demands of his new, colossal baby. If Owen wandered too far, Mzee would often stop, wait, and only resume his slow journey once the hippo was firmly back at his side. He provided a stillness, a quiet presence that calmed the tempest of Owen's trauma. The age difference, over a century, and the species difference were irrelevant to the language of need and comfort they spoke. Owen would follow Mzee into the water, a significant step since the hippo had initially been wary of the deep end after his ocean ordeal. But if Mzee entered, Owen would plunge in immediately, swimming circles around the massive tortoise, often using Mzee's shell as a temporary flotation device. It was an inversion of nature, the aquatic creature seeking refuge with the terrestrial one, the young seeking protection from the impossibly old. Owen began to mouth-feed Mzee, a behavior observed in hippo calves trying to groom their mothers, gently mouthing the algae and moss off Mzee's shell and skin. It was pure, unadulterated devotion. The keepers began to rely on Mzee's presence to manage Owen. If the hippo became restless or agitated, they simply directed him back toward the tortoise, and the conflict would dissipate instantly as Owen submitted to the grounding presence of his new protector. They were a single unit, two halves of a completely unexpected whole. News of this extraordinary friendship began to spread, first across Kenya and then internationally. People were captivated by the sight of the huge, wrinkled baby hippo glued to the side of the placid, prehistoric tortoise. They saw not just an odd couple, but a living, breathing testament to the power of connection and the universality of grieving and healing. The world looked at Mzee and Owen and saw that love requires no common language, no common history, and certainly no common anatomy to thrive. Their bond was proof that sometimes the family we desperately need is found in the most improbable places, a quiet miracle unfolding every day in the heart of the Kenyan sanctuary. For several years, the extraordinary family flourished, but nature is relentless, and the small hippo calf was not destined to remain small. Owen's growth rate was explosive. A hippo is one of the largest land mammals, and by the age of 5, Owen's bulk had become a logistical and safety concern. He was no longer a calf gently resting his head on Mzee's shell. He was a juvenile weighing hundreds of pounds, and his playful nudges, while affectionate, posed a serious risk to the ancient tortoise. Mzee's shell, while incredibly strong, could not withstand the accidental, crushing weight of a fully developed young hippo. The keepers watched with growing apprehension. Owen, instinctively seeking Mzee's constant physical presence, would sometimes lie on the tortoise entirely. The bond was beautiful, but the danger was real. The very act of closeness that had saved Owen's life now threatened Mzee's. The sanctuary staff faced a heart-wrenching decision. To separate them would risk re-traumatizing Owen and severing a unique, globally beloved bond. To keep them together meant gambling with the life of the 130-year-old tortoise. They knew they had to prioritize safety and welfare for both animals. Owen was growing into the magnificent, albeit massive, creature he was meant to be. The solution required another massive relocation. Owen needed a space that could accommodate his increasing size, and, crucially, he needed to begin the long process of transitioning back toward his own kind. A new sanctuary area was prepared, a vast, complex enclosure designed specifically for a maturing hippo, complete with deeper, larger pools and specialized feeding areas. This new space was miles away from Mzee's quiet corner. The physical separation was going to be the biggest challenge they had yet faced. The move itself was agonizing. Owen, sensing the disturbance and Mzee's absence, became highly agitated, exhibiting the frantic behaviors of his arrival day. He called out, a low, powerful bellow, and searched desperately for the immovable, silent reassurance of the tortoise. When he arrived at the new location, he was inconsolable. The trauma of his first loss, the tsunami's brutal lesson in abandonment, seemed to resurface with agonizing clarity. He refused to settle, refusing food, and spending days patrolling the perimeter of the fence, staring into the distance where he knew Mzee was not. The sanctuary staff tried to soothe him, but they were humans. They were not his rock. Meanwhile, Mzee, in his quiet, ancient way, seemed to register the loss. He became less active, often retreating into his shell for longer periods. The slow, deliberate rhythm of his life was disrupted by the sudden, terrifying absence of his enormous, devoted shadow. The keepers saw a subtle, profound loneliness in the way Mzee moved across the enclosure, no longer checking behind him, no longer slowing down to allow the young Leviathan to catch up. Their silence was a shared grief, a long-distance echo of heartbreak. This necessary separation was the true test of their connection. Had Owen truly healed, or was his attachment to Mzee simply a temporary bandage over a catastrophic wound? The world watched and worried, hoping the emotional foundations they had built would prove stronger than the physical distance that now stretched between them. The first weeks of separation were a heartbreaking vigil for the sanctuary team. They introduced a young female hippo named Humphrey to Owen's new enclosure, hoping for a natural, immediate connection. Owen ignored her completely, viewing the new arrival as a distraction, not a replacement. His attention remained fixed on the invisible line that separated him from his true family. He was healing physically, his massive frame growing stronger, but his heart, it seemed, was still tethered to the slow, steady rhythm of Mzee. It took time, a gentle, arduous application of patience, for Owen to acknowledge the possibility of a new life. The keepers facilitated small, controlled interactions between Owen and Humphrey, allowing them brief periods of shared water time. Slowly, tentatively, Owen began to recognize the familiar comfort of his own kind. He began to mimic Humphrey's movements, learning the social cues of a proper hippo. This was the long-desired, crucial step towards normalization. He was learning to be a hippo again, not just an orphan. But the progress did not erase the past. The profound foundational healing Mzee provided was not forgotten. On occasional, very rare visits, the keepers would bring Mzee's old blanket or a piece of foliage from his enclosure to Owen. The hippo would stop all activity, his immense body stilling as he inhaled the familiar, earthy scent. It was a silent acknowledgement that distance only defined space, not affection. The true measure of their love was not their constant proximity, but Owen's ability to thrive despite their absence. He could finally swim freely, socialize naturally, and eat without the desperate need for a shell as an emotional crutch. But he never forgot the one who saved him. His playful demeanor returned, but a part of his spirit remained quiet, carrying the deep unspoken lesson Mzee taught him, that family is built on loyalty, regardless of biology. Mzee, meanwhile, eventually settled back into his ancient solitude, the shadow that followed him gone. Yet the memory of its warmth forever imprinted on his slow, enduring pace. The arc of their connection had reached its crest, a bond strong enough to survive separation, powerful enough to facilitate growth, and unique enough to forever change the definition of love. The quiet, steady friendship between the orphaned hippo and the centenarian tortoise became far more than just a sweet story from an African sanctuary. It became a global parable for healing, a simple, undeniable truth delivered by the most unlikely of messengers. Their relationship transcended every boundary humanity holds dear: species, age, environment, and history. It proved that the instinct to nurture, to protect, and to seek connection is a fundamental, universal law, written not in textbooks, but in the deepest parts of the living world. The images of the massive, youthful hippo nestled against the scarred, ancient shell of the tortoise resonated because they spoke directly to the vulnerability that resides in all of us. We all seek that anchor, that constant, immovable presence in the wake of our own personal storms, whether they are actual tsunamis or the tidal waves of daily life. Mzee was that anchor, demonstrating with silent, enduring patience that the greatest strength lies not in force, but in unwavering stability. Owen's life became a testament to the fact that trauma is not the end of the story, but merely a difficult introduction to a new chapter. His healing was facilitated by an act of interspecies empathy that defied all scientific prediction, relying only on the basic restorative power of touch and constant, non-judgmental companionship. The tale of the two of them is revisited endlessly, not just as an anecdote of animal oddity, but as a genuine lesson in unconditional acceptance. It reminds us that the best healers rarely look like what we expect, and that the greatest family is often found outside the conventional definitions we impose upon the world. Their enduring legacy is a whisper across the globe, a persistent reminder of the sanctuary that can be found in a single, simple honest connection. Every time the story is told, it reinforces the quiet power of finding a safe place to rest your head when the world has been too loud. And so the quiet love story of the hippo and the tortoise endures, a gentle rhythm beneath the noise of a frantic world. It settles into the soul, a quiet assurance that even from the wreckage of deepest loss, the heart possesses an infinite capacity to attach, to heal, and to love anew. It is the purest echo of empathy, the kind that saves. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to light. We have a question for you. What was the single moment in this story that resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one.